Hello, welcome to another episode of Under Review with me, Andy Tattersall. I'm out and about on this miserable late winter's afternoon, but at least the nights are drawing out a little bit more. And I'm going to tell you about my next guest. Introduce my guest on the series is Elisabeth Bik, who's based in the US. And when we spoke, she had considerably better weather than we were experiencing here in the UK. Elisabeth is a leading academic fraud investigator. She seeks out academic malpractice and is a microbiologist by trade. The work that she's done has led to, I've got the piece of paper here, it's resulted at present to 1,600 retractions and expressions of concern and 1,200 corrections. So it's a huge problem. I don't think we can underestimate how big a problem this is. She's also a leader in the area of scientific integrity and received the 2021 Maddox Prize and the 2024 Einstein Foundation Award. In this podcast and videocast, we talk about the extent of this problem, how we're going to deal with malpractice, how do we deal with the bad actors that are involved in this, how can peer review be improved to fix this problem, because it's getting worse and it's leading to more and more publications being retracted. Peer review is not good enough to pick it up, and paper mills are flourishing as a result of this due to the publish or perish nature of academia and generative AI's input into that, and how it's made this problem so much worse. And people like Elisabeth is working hard to deal with the actual influx of problems that we're seeing as a result of all of this. So it's a fascinating discussion and I hope you'll enjoy it. So hello, Elisabeth. Thank you for your time, for joining me in the US in the morning. I'm in the afternoon, in the evening, to talk about the issues relating to, should we say, for a better term, sort of fraud, academic fraud, or malpractice, or
sure, whatever you want to call it, like concerns.
Concerns, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the neutral term. Yeah,
the neutral term.
Yeah.
Now, since you've been doing this, which is over a decade now, you've uncovered an awful lot of this problem. How big, and I know this is a tricky one to start with, how big is this problem, not just in terms of scale, because we're talking about a huge ecosystem and an industry, but in terms of like the other issues, really, reputation and societal damage by, we remember the Andrew Wakefield paper and the damage that caused many years ago, but also potentially the financial cost, which I know is tricky to answer, but
yeah, that's a big question to start with. So it's hard to know what the percentage of problematic papers are, and it's also really hard to know which papers just have a problem, like some duplication or some questionable values, versus straight out misconduct. I mean, those things are really hard to distinguish just if you just look at the paper. But I did a survey in 2015, so 10 years ago, and I looked at papers specifically looking for duplicated images, which is my specialty. I look for photos that have been reused to represent two different experiments, for example, photos that overlap or photos that even contain duplicated parts. So while sometimes you can say it's misconduct, some of these might be honest errors. And I found that about 4% of the papers that I looked at, which were molecular biology papers that had photos, that 4%, so 1 in 25 of those papers had duplicated images, duplicated panels. And about half of those we estimated to be done deliberately. So let's say two photos overlapped, but one of them was rotated or mirrored or stretched, perhaps with an intention to make it less visible that these were the same photos, or photos that had duplicated elements within the photo. So let's say a photo that had where the same cell is visible twice, or the same groups of cells are visible twice or 3 times or 4 times within the same photo. Those we were pretty sure were intentionally done. But So 1 in 25 papers had a visible problem. Now, of course, we know that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there has to be much more problems that are less visible when you really either zoom in on a photo or a photo that had been reused from another paper, which is really hard to recognize by eye. So the 1 in 25 or the 2% of misconduct is an underestimate. I also think that that was 10 years ago, that it's probably higher. And there's even one preprint that suggests that in cancer research, maybe 1 in 10 papers, so 10% of papers might be fabricated, might be the results of paper mills, like fabricated research that is done on a contracting basis. So there's a lot to cover, I think, but yeah, if it's 1 in 10 papers, that's a lot, right? That is, yeah. If we talk about financial costs, I don't even know what that would be.
So part of this podcast is about an opportunity as well for you to put things into the under review bin. So I think it's a given that you would chuck Papermills in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like Papermills, and I don't know how much your audience is familiar with that, but that would be sort of a contractor, a scammer, even a group of people that make fake papers or very low quality papers, and that sell the authorship positions to people who want to have a paper on their resume. And so it's these papers could be either completely fabricated, they could be plagiarized, they could be AI generated. They're usually low quality papers, but the authors whose names are on the paper did not contribute to the papers other than paying for the authorships. So yeah, so those papers, those paper mill productions are on the rise. We estimate that so like I said, like in 10% of cancer papers might be paper mill produced. And it's a huge dilution, right, of scientific papers if you just don't know what to trust anymore.
I suppose that goes back to the cost as well, because this all comes with a cost, not just labor, but the financial cost. So publishing papers is not cheap.
Absolutely, and there's just so many layers of costs you can think of. Like, it's not just the cost of somebody paying for these papers to read them, and we all pay for it either through open access or your paid subscription through your university library. Somebody's paying to get these papers published. So if 10 or even higher percentage of those papers are fake or low quality, like it's just a dilution, a pollution almost of scientific literature. But there's other types of costs. For example, if you're reading these papers and you're basing your new hypothesis on it, or you put your grad students on that new project, and they're trying to replicate those fake results, not knowing that they were fake, that's a huge cost as well, the financial cost of paying for these researchers, or ordering the reagent that they have to use, just the years that they spent trying to replicate those papers. I mean, I don't even know how to measure that in cost, but that has to be billions of dollars or pounds.
And it's fair to say the trajectory is that it's getting worse. This is not getting better. This is getting worse.
This is getting worse. Absolutely. It's hard to measure because we don't always know when something is fake. It's hard to prove. The paper millers are getting better. In the beginning, we could still catch them because they made very dumb errors. But, technology has been given them the opportunity to create even more fake papers. And of course, we're going to talk about AI at some point, I'm sure. But their paper millers are getting better because we caught them in the beginning, and basically we told them how to do better, how to fraud better. And so it's getting harder and harder to catch them. Plus, there's an increasing pressure to publish. So that is ever increasing. As scientists, we're held more and more accountable for all these metrics, like how many papers did you publish, and there's so many people who want to do a postdoc or grad studentship in other countries because they might live in a country that doesn't have a lot of money for research. They might hope for a better future, and in order to get such a postdoc position in, let's say, Europe or the UK, maybe not so much in the US right now, but they they need papers on their resume, because that's sort of, that it's telling other people that they're actual researchers. We love to look at resumes. We love to look at how many papers a person published. And so people are paying money to these paper mills to get their resume look better. And you cannot really blame them. You cannot really blame people for wanting to have a better future. But this pressure is ever increasing. So yes, I do think this is a growing problem to an extent we don't really know yet.
So would publish or perish go into the bin?
Absolutely. I mean, that is just the main driver for all of this, right? This pressure to publish. And I'm not sure what to replace it with, but this whole fight for grant money, this whole fight for or this whole drive to be on the list of highest publishing researcher at your university, all those things should go in the bin. All these lists, it's hard to replace it with something else, because we humans love lists like that. We love, the top 10 of most clicked on articles, or the best moments of 2025. We love lists like that. And so researchers are going to be, it's going to be hard to replace it with something else. But I don't necessarily think that the number of papers that a person has published is a good indicator for if they are a good scientist.
And so based on what you said from the original research where you were looking, and you found that a lot of the issues were being caused by human error, whether that was incompetence or just not really knowing how to actually do the research, to the issues that we're talking about with paper mills and some of the bad tactics that we see in certain countries to pressure academics to put out more and more publications. Do you see that the kind of the sort of like the shift has been much more driven towards the bad actors? In terms of, when I say bad actors, that could be the institution, that could be academics who are just trying to get ahead, trying to do whatever they can. We've seen stories, and no doubt you've seen the story about the guy who published 144 papers that cited 143 that were all AI generated to get a H index of 143. Do you think that's become more of the driving factor, and that's the bigger problem than actual genuine sort of human error?
Yes, I mean, there's people who are actively gaming these metrics, who are actively publishing very low quality papers, put them in predatory publishers that are picked up by Google Scholar, for example, because Google Scholar, I think, is not always very good in distinguishing genuine papers versus crap and slop. And so I know one person actually who claims to have like millions of citations, because all he does is use AI to write what he calls books that apparently cite himself, and he puts them somewhere, maybe on ResearchGate or so, and then he removes them, so you can only see a ghost of it. You could sort of see an introduction page to the paper, but the book, you can never find the book itself. But somehow Google has picked it up, and he has written like hundreds of books using AI, I'm sure, and all these books cite himself. And so since they're all sort of roughly on the same topic, he keeps on writing new books with slightly different titles, and Google Scholar thinks he has millions of citations. So if you know how the system works, you can game it, you can fool it into thinking that you've published all these papers. And since these are sort of automated bots that pick up things that it finds on the internet that it thinks are science, it's really easy to fool the systems and to generate more citations. So it looks like some of these researchers have enormous citations, enormous H indices, and look like incredibly productive authors. But very often, if you actually look at their stats, you can see the production went up since the end of 2022, 2023, and you can sort of hint like what changed around that time. Why are they suddenly so much more productive? And it's AI like that. When ChatGPT became more available a couple of years ago to the audience, to the main audience, people have misused it. And so you see, people producing a couple of papers a year maybe, and then suddenly they produce hundreds of papers a year, and it just, it's not that they write it themselves, it's just AI writing it.
It's a rather shallow existence, and to live in, and they're the kind of people you wouldn't want to play a board game against, because they would cheat in any which way to win that game. And I personally would never cheat in a board game, because I wouldn't take pleasure in it, and I wouldn't take pleasure in AI generated books to get a metric up, but obviously they're not me. Talking about AI and thinking about the one of the most notable stories of the last couple of years is the one of the rat with the can't say the word, but gigantic testicles, that was published in Frontier Cell and Biology Development and Biology. It made an international news story. It was picked up by things like Vice and other websites as well. I think it's the BBC. Do you think that was a wake-up call for the academic community, or do you think that suddenly, like, academics are thinking, hey, I could make AI-generated images, I just won't be that guy?
I'm not sure if it was a wake-up call, but it would definitely, made us all laugh, and it's very memorable. I think most people who are on some social media will remember this particular image, and the photo wasn't even a photo. It was a sort of a diagram or a cartoon, but it definitely wasn't scientifically correct. If you'd like, it's it wasn't the labels weren't readable. It was just all AI slop, and so it's recognizable as a funny picture. There were even worse images in that paper, by the way, and I think the whole paper in the end got retracted because it was also written by AIs. But so it wasn't trying to show a real experiment, but like I hope it made everybody think, like, AI is now so good, and this was 1 or 2 years ago, so now AI has improved and it's still improving, so it can generate really realistic looking photos. We've all seen fake videos, fake photos of people, whose faces we recognize. And so how easy is it to make a fake photo of a fake experiment? Because humans are very good in recognizing faces. So if we can, make a president show up in an AI video or AI photo in a certain situation that he actually never was in, it's much easier to use AI to make a fake cell or so, because we wouldn't recognize, doesn't have ears and eyes, and our brains are not really geared towards recognizing a cell or tissue versus a human face. So it's much easier to fake an experiment. So I think this was a wake-up call, the rat with the giant penis and testicles, a wake-up call how AI has entered the scientific literature and produces sloppy images that are not realistic, but we now all know it can be used to make realistic photos. So I'm very worried about how AI can, and probably is already being used, to make us believe that an experiment happened, to generate fake photos, because we used to think a photo or didn't happen. Like an actual photo is proof that something happens, but now we cannot distinguish an AI generated photo from a real photo. So I think that is a huge problem, and very likely, almost certainly, is already being used by paper millers to generate fake photos and fake experiments.
And in your time investigating all this, pre-generative AI and post, what's the worst single example? Is anything that stands out where there's something really, really just so bad or so damaging, perhaps, that it really, really has stood out?
Oh, there's a lot of examples. I have a spreadsheet with almost 10,000 examples, so it's really hard to pick one. I mean, I've worked on a paper together with Matthew Schrag and Charles Piller, the journalist from Science. And Matthew Schrag is a neuroscientist, neuroresearcher, who recognized that one particular photo in a paper that was highly cited in the Alzheimer's space, that contained what we think were photoshopped elements. And I worked on that paper. I found some other examples in that paper as well, and some other papers from the same researcher. And that particular paper was highly cited. So it was cited like over 2,000 times and was somewhat influential in the Alzheimer's beta amyloid hypothesis. So I'm not sure how influential it was, but it was highly cited. So definitely led people to believe that the data in that paper were true, and led a lot of other people to build on that paper. And so it was a good example of how influential such a paper can be. And it's now retracted because these images were found to be manipulated, in part at least. And yeah, so it's an example that is memorable. But there's many other papers that have had much lower impact, were less cited, but that had enormously photoshopped images that when you see them and you start working on them and you start circling these elements with a colored box to point out that they were duplicated, I can spend hours circling all those elements because there were so many. But yeah, there's many memorable papers like that.
Does it, I mean, this is a different topic around peer review, but does it sort of like make you feel quite depressed about the state of peer review?
Yeah, I'm a peer reviewer myself too, so I try to do my best. But yeah, I think peer review has sort of reached its limit. Like there's so many papers now being published, all due to this pressure to publish. Like we all together, there's many more scientists than there were 30, 40 years ago. And there are many more papers being produced by all of these scientists. So it's sort of an exponential growth. And I think we've reached the limits of how many peer reviewers we have to review all that, you know, all those papers, some of which are great and many of them are probably crappy. But it's, and also peer review is not designed to find fraud. It's designed to, it starts from the viewpoint that the paper is real, that the data is real, that it was generated by honest scientists whom 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you knew all these people, right? The scientific world was much smaller. So you knew at least the labs that were doing similar research, and you felt you could trust them. But I think now, since science is now so much more global and so much more productive, that you know, you're peer reviewing papers, you have no idea if they're real or not. And most peer reviewers, of course, are unpaid and are not trained to find fraud. So I think we need to have secondary systems in place, filters that will look for fraud specifically, or that is, you know, just like specific statistical problems. Statistics is so much more complex than decades ago. And there's things like ethical approval, there's things like animal ethics, human ethics, conflicts of interest. All these things have exponentially, and I say exponentially without meaning anything scientifically, but have grown so much in the past couple of years that it's so much more complex, that peer review is not designed to catch all these problems. And I think that publishers need to have secondary layers of filters scanning for these specific things.
And thinking about other sectors outside of academia, thinking about misconduct or genuine errors, but particularly let's focus on the bad actors. So that are people who we've got a good idea they've intentionally set to deceive, lie, and falsify, and they've published this content. Now, if we were in a different sector, if I was a professional sportsman and I cheated, I would be punished in some way, whether a fine or a ban, and depending on the severity of it, and, you know, from some things, you know, you've investigated the very, very severe consequences, there would be a penalty. What would you like to see? You know, if you're in charge of all this, we've got this under review right now. You can do whatever you want. What would you like to see in terms of an international system, or certainly national system, international system, that deals with authors that we know have fabricated, they've produced deliberately falsified data, and then when we get to the next stage, repeat offenders, which we obviously have seen, and we do see these repeat offenders who've got away with it, they keep getting away with it, there's no punishment, They're going to keep doing it. The H index goes up. Nobody really properly checks their resume, and they get tenure, and they continue. They're not likely to change from being a bad actor to a good actor if there's no penalty. What would you do?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I would be very much in favor for national or even international committees that would investigate these cases, because it is actually very hard to prove A, that there was misconduct, and B, who has done it. Those two questions are much more complicated than I definitely thought when I started doing this work. I thought it was very clear who did the misconduct, but for that you need to go into the lab books, which mysteriously disappeared. And then there's all this conflict of interest if you let these cases be investigated by the university itself, which is normally how it happens. There's too much conflict of interest to really believe in an honest outcome. So yes, if it's a grad student who did some photoshopping, maybe they need to leave their graduate student position and do something else than academia, perhaps. But if it's more on a higher level, let's say the professor is a bully who bullies everybody into producing more and working on in the weekends and repeating the experiment until it actually delivers what the PI wants, and then you get these situations where graduate students are cheating to please the professor, because otherwise they lose their position, or their whole career is damaged unless they publish a paper with this famous professor. So what I'm trying to say is the question of who has done the misconduct, who is responsible for it, is actually much more complex than you think, because it might be that one photoshopping grad student, but it's actually the bullying professor who sort of creates this culture of cheating. And so we see these labs where you see over and over again that decades of grad students and postdocs are cheating. So it's almost the PI is responsible for creating this culture. But then you have the more complex layer of the university who doesn't really want to point fingers to the professor. It's much easier to have the graduate student leave than to say, oh, within our walls, this famous professor who might have brought in so much money, we're going to let that person go. Because very often these persons are productive. They bring in lots of money. They bring in lots of grants. And so to have these cases investigated by their own university is a huge conflict of interest, because the outcome very often is going to be, oh, there was no misconduct, even if we're looking at these photoshopped images. And so there's legal teams who are also involved, and anyway, these cases can take years, sometimes decades, to investigate, and the outcome is very often very unsatisfactory. So a national board that could investigate these cases, that has hopefully a little bit less of these conflict of interest questions, might be better than to have these cases investigated by their own university. So that is one thing I would love to see changed, that universities don't investigate these cases, especially when it's a suspicion on professor level.
So I think we could all agree we'd like to see bullying professors go into the bin. I think
yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
They've been a problem for a long time. And I can imagine it would be a problem that some countries just wouldn't want to go down that path, because they're kind of complicit in this whole process, aren't they? If you're wanting to aspire to achieve the greats, of the US and the UK and Germany, and you're in a country that may be developing your academic research output, that there may be a little bit of an anxiety or reluctance to do that, as there would be, I'd imagine, in more developed nations. So, but I think that this is very much overdue, isn't it? Really, in terms of dealing with problematic academics and publishing and the harm it's doing. So we'll have that on our kind of on our manifesto. And in terms of the authors that you've sort of like who've had their papers retracted, and I know you receive has to be said in this podcast, you receive an awful lot of flack, particularly on X,
Yes.
which can't be very easy at all. Incredible,
No.
you know, you stick to your work, because we know what a toxic and hostile environment that is. In terms of the authors who've had papers retracted, have any ever contacted you either to complain or to try and explain what they did?
No, actually, I very rarely, and I think this is a good thing, very rarely authors contact me privately. Although I've had a couple of cases where one famous researcher who was like a top immunologist in China sent me private emails saying, oh, okay, I'm working on it. I take this very seriously. And it sounded good, but there were so many papers from his lab with what appeared to be photoshopped images that it was disappointing to hear the outcome that, again, there was no misconduct found under his leadership. But so occasionally I get emails, but much more often I get a lot of hate by anonymous trolls who might be the authors, we don't know, who try to make me look like a bad person and accuse me of the most horrible things, tagging the FBI, tagging, you know, current leadership in the US, and in the hopes, I guess, that I'll be prosecuted for criminal activity because I dare to criticize their papers. It's, you know, the US and X in particular are huge cesspools of misinformation and unregulated hate and horrible things happening there without any moderation. It's anything goes there. And so for me, X could be definitely in the bin. You know, we need better social media. We need more moderation, because if you let go of moderation, then, you know, it's just going to be hate. So I'm more active on Blue Sky nowadays. That seems to be a better place. But yeah, you get a lot of hate if you criticize other people's papers, and I get that. I know that people are not happy with it, but I would love to have a scientific discussion. And it's very rare that an author can take away my concerns by giving an honest answer. It's very often I see what appears to be a photoshopped image, and I know some of these papers are old, and so you might not have those original data anymore. But in some cases, the papers are relatively new, let's say 5 years old, and instead of, you know, showing me a photo that proves that I'm wrong, that these two images were not the same, they were slightly different if you look at a higher resolution photo, for example. No, that very rarely happens. It's much more often that the authors will complain and will accuse me of political motivations or whatever conspiracy theory they can think of. So I feel when people send me hate and send me pushback on what I did in my past and what, you know, how the way I look, they don't have any scientific arguments, and so maybe I'm actually right. So in a way, and this is sort of my my way of coping with the hate that I get, is thinking, well, if they insult me personally, then there's no scientific arguments to have. So actually, I'm right. So the more they insult me, in a way, it strengthens me in doing this even more.
That's an incredible attitude, because, you know, an awful lot of people would have stepped away from that, and the fact that you've stuck with it. And I would imagine you kind of expect you're going to get the pushbacks relating to vaccines and COVID and climate change, research around that, because we know that the trolls are out there looking for that, and they're or the lobbyists, other people with agendas. But do you think where you might get something where it's more of a, shall we say, a niche piece of research, that perhaps could be the author?
Sometimes I do think that. I mean, it's hard to know who is a real person on Twitter and who is a bot, because I cannot distinguish them. I know some of the accounts that have large followers there's real people behind them. It has to be, or maybe I'm just not crediting AI enough. But I do feel there's real people behind it. They might, you know, buy a swarm of bots to reinforce and retweet them. You see that their tweets have thousands of likes, and I have, you know, even if they only have like a couple of hundreds of followers, and I have lots of followers, or at least I used to have lots of followers on X when it still was Twitter. My tweets now get like 20 likes or so, and you can see that it's all lopsided. Like, it cannot be real people anymore. There is some algorithm that makes these bots, float to the top, while real people are not visible or are not being retweeted anymore. So it is sort of a sinking ship. I feel it's, in the end, it's all the bots and the nasty people who will just troll each other. And it's still hard to leave Twitter, though, because it's what made me visible. It's the instrument I've used in past years to send my message out. And it's really hard to switch completely to Blue Sky. So I'm still a little bit active, but realizing that most of the likes I get are still from the people who are still there, and most of the likes that the haters get are probably from bots. That's sort of what you have to keep in mind. But it is a sinking ship, and definitely should go in the bin since Elon Musk took over.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast is called Under Review. So if we were to pause all academic publishing tomorrow, and the likes of Elsevier and others, they can live off of their kind of pots of money that they've built up, and we were to say pause it and say, look, when you mention the potential that 10% of cancer publications could involve fake information, that potentially very damaging information. So if we were to pause it tomorrow and you're in charge of this whole new world, where would you start? What would you go, right, this is how we'll begin again?
I would propose like micro publications where scientists publish, let's say, one figure, like one, not super complex experiments like we see now in some journals that have, 48 supplemental figures, and every figure has like 20 panels. Like, it's too complex to understand. Like let's go back to basic experiments, let's say one figure or a couple of panels, and then publish that online, and then have other people peer review it, like, publicly. And then, there's going to be a lot of crap that we can immediately toss in the bin, but I'm sure it's going to be gamed in some ways that the trolls can come in and promote the anti-vax paper or something like that. But I do feel we need to switch from this old-fashioned peer review system to a more public one where people can comment on it publicly. And that might be, I know that some journals like eLife has tried a model like that. I mean, I think many of these new ideas might not work in the end, but I do feel there's something to say for a more public trajectory where you publish a preprint online and then people can comment on it and it can grow, and maybe additional experiments have to be done. But I think we need to get away from these huge storylines that papers now have become and go back to a more basic, simple experiment where everybody can sort of understand what happened, and that all peer reviewers, because peer reviewers also have a hard time since papers are so big and so multidisciplinary. Peer reviewers can often only look at one particular aspect of the paper and not cover things like, let's say, statistics or bioinformatics parts that they don't understand, or vice versa, where the clinical data is hard to understand for a statistician, for example. So I think we need to break away from these large papers, do micro publications, and have the whole system be more publicly done, with the caveat that some troll is going to break that system too. We just have to, find out.
We have to keep moving, don't we? We have to keep adapting. Yeah. And I'd imagine that this model would help with reproducibility.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in the end, reproducibility is the only way we know that an experiment is real and that it can be reproduced somewhere else. But it is hard because from microbiology, and so a lot of, if we work with living organisms as biologists, living and organisms, cells, enzymes, it's really hard to replicate an experiment in another lab because the temperature might be slightly different, or the manufacturer is different, or the ozone concentration in our lab is different. Who knows? Like, it's really hard to please a living cell and to make it happy and to perform again the way that it did in another lab. So reproducibility in biology is challenging, and it doesn't mean that if we cannot replicate a paper that it's fraudulent. There's so many other reasons why it might not work. But I do think it's the only way in the end to know if an experiment is fake or real. It's so hard nowadays to make that distinction, and so we need to focus more on reproducibility and get credit for that. Like, people who reproduce a paper there should be recognition for that, and you should be able to put that on your resume.
So in this world that you're building from scratch, that would be a key thing that you would have.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like, for example, I've been proposing the idea that a grad student in, let's say, their first year of research should reproduce a paper in their field, and that should be publishable no matter what the outcome is. Because I think if we force grad students to publish 3 or 4 papers before they can get their PhD, we're almost encouraging them to cheat, right? Because we know how hard it is. At least if I remember my PhD, it was really hard to reproduce somebody else's experiment. And we should allow, universities should allow that failure to happen, and should applaud it, and should encourage to publish that. Maybe a journal of irreproducible results or something like that. And and have less pressure on grad students to actually publish positive results. Like, negative results should also be and are very valuable to publish. So that would be another thing I would change.
And going back to peer review and post publication peer review and open peer review, this has been experimented with for many years. BMJ tried it many years ago, and they found that the peer reviews were better, but they were certainly lent against such as junior or female academics, if I remember, doing open peer review, because they were fearful of the consequences of that. And PubMed had like a post peer review model, which they ditched for some reason, because they didn't think the uptake was very, very big. But I don't know why they would get rid of it. Would you just say, look, we're going to have open, everything's open, everything is post? But if we were to do that, how would we ensure those checks and balances in? Would you make it that you've got to be tied into an ORCID ID, things like that?
Yeah, perhaps that will be a thing. I mean, we can think about maybe people who are full-time peer reviewers and who are paid to peer review papers, and who have earned their credit some way or another. Any model we can think of is going to be gameable, cheatable, but like, you don't want a random person to be able to come in and promote, let's say, an anti-vax paper, or a paper that claims that the Earth is flat. Like, you want peer reviewers who have some credentials. So on PubPeer, which is the website I use a lot, it's post-publication peer review platform. So we comment on papers. You can do that anonymously or not, or under your full name, but it is moderated. So you cannot just say, that person is a cheater or is a fraud. You have to come up with good arguments that are verifiable. So even some of my comments don't make it through. We're sometimes a little bit too sarcastic, I think, but we feel that's a good attempt, like, to replace PubMed comments, what you just referred to, the PubMed way of commenting on a paper post-publication. Like PubPeer is sort of fulfilling that niche, and is a platform that we can use. And you can even install a plugin that when you do a literature search, you can see if a paper has received PubPeer comments or not, and you can participate in the discussion. So we feel this is a good attempt of keeping the discussion open in the public, but also moderated. So also polite and verifiable.
So this idea, the suggestion that you're making, so under this new start, full-time paid peer reviewers, which probably would sound quite to people listening to podcasts, would be quite a revelation. But when we think about things like funding, people have brokered the idea that people's jobs, that we should pay people just to apply for funding. That's their job. They do funding applications, and that's what they do. Because we work on this idea that academics are great. They should be able to do everything. And as we know, they don't do a lot of things very well, and they might not be very good at putting in for bids, and they may not be actually very good at peer review, but we don't actually know that because they're not trained, are we? You're a student, you learn how to read a paper and how to cite it, but are all students really taught to critically appraise a paper and then feed that back? And that would get around that issue.
Definitely not. I think I definitely had to learn peer review by trial and error, a lot of error, and reading other people's peer review. So it wasn't really part of my training, and I think it still is not. So peer review it has a lot of flaws. I don't think we can live without it, because you don't want a model where everybody can just publish anything. We can already see where that's going on Twitter. There's so much misinformation and blog posts that are being sort of proposed as real science. So we need peer review for sure. And I am not also sure if paying peer reviewers is a good solution, but I do think that there should be more professional peer reviewers who are paid, who are just part of our scientific system. And I think we should also rethink the whole funding and grant application process, because I think most PIs nowadays are just almost full-time trying to get money. And maybe we just have too many scientists, and maybe we should have a more simple way of giving money to people we as a system, I guess, we believe are good scientists. Just give them, this is a salary, and don't have to worry about salary for the next 20 years. You could just do whatever you propose. And I think this whole cycle of 2 or 3 years of grants applications is horrible, and it's just taking away a lot of resources from good people who could be doing science in the meantime. So I wish there were more systems where people who do good research could just focus on doing research, and are just staff positions who don't have to worry about getting their salary for the next 3 years.
And your suggestion about being a full-time paid peer reviewer, I think it is a really good one, because it places an onus on that group of people to do a good job. Whereas if you're a peer reviewer that nobody knows you're a reviewer to, nobody knows who you are, you're doing this in amongst all these other admin tasks and trying to publish your own papers, that you do a half-baked job and there's no comeback. And hence why we are seeing so much poor quality research coming through. So this would potentially be a real potential game changer.
Yeah, I mean, you could think about that. Let's say in the US, that NIH, which of course nowadays is in shambles, but if we think back of the way when the days when it was still sort of functioning, like have a group of, I don't know, maybe 1,000 paid grant or peer reviewers who are just doing that, like that's their job. I can think a lot of people would be happy doing that. People who are not really happy in a lab, but who are really smart scientists who could do that. And that is just part of our scientific funding system as a country. That could be a solution. Of course, you would also have then to have people who peer review the peer reviewers, like, right? They need to be monitored that they're doing a good job. You definitely need to take out the bad apples that you inevitably will get if you offer job positions like that. So I'm sure maybe it's not a good solution, because there will be problems upstream or downstream the road where people are doing a bad job, and we need to monitor them. But I think maybe like people who are like close to retirement, who are sort of don't want to run a lab anymore, but love to, have an opinion, have strong opinions about how papers should look like and what good science should look like. They could be a paid peer reviewer. Maybe that's a good solution.
I think that sounds like a very good solution, because you're making me think about academics that I see, particularly on Blue Sky where I am, who are semi-retired, they're emeritus professors, or they're still clearly very interested, and they're critiquing papers publicly on social media, and they're highlighting issues, or they're talking about this. So they're clearly, so this could be a nice little sideline and a nice little income that they could do as part of that role. So I think that'd be a good suggestion. Is there anything else that you would do as part of this new world? Anything else that you kind of feel, or is it, would we just start with those? in terms of dealing with the issues that you invariably come across every day?
Yeah, I mean, like having grad students reproduce a paper is already a thing I brought up earlier. Oh gosh, nothing I can think of now. I felt we already covered a lot.
Yeah, you've given 2 or 3 really quite what would be for academia radical changes. They sound very progressive, because we're certainly going in the wrong direction in terms of dealing with these issues, aren't we? And is there anything that you would like take out as well? We talked about the bullying professors. We've talked about publish or perish. Is there anything else that you would go, that's going in the under review bin? You can get rid of it. Now's your chance to get rid of it.
Yeah, all these postdoc positions, like just if a person is a good scientist, just give them a staff position. And I was lucky enough to be at Stanford and have a staff scientist position where I didn't have to worry, like there was some stream of money that would pay my salary, and I didn't have to reapply every 2 or 3 years for a new job. I feel we need many more of these staff scientists, and just the whole grant application maybe should go. This whole funding cycle thing should go in the bin. Like, just if a professor is a good group leader, just give them money. Like it would save so much time for them. They don't have to worry about applying for new grants every year, or multiple grants every year. It would free them so much to do more research, and I feel that in the end is going to be more efficient for everyone if we get rid of all these funding cycles. And of course, that's a big idea, and a lot of people will criticize me for that. But I do feel if there's a person who has proven their worth, just give them like a good salary, and maybe every year they have to sort of defend that they did a good job. But like this whole wasting 80% of their time on grant application, that should go.
So we've got a few things in the bin. We've got a few
new things, right?
And a few new things. So hopefully that will help deal with, let's say, the point of this podcast is to kind of just to have a bit of the sort of the blue sky thinking. We know there's things that don't work. We know there's an awful lot of them that don't work. And given the area of the world that we work in, we're about trying to find answers, aren't we? And having this conversation, I think, has produced a few maybe that hopefully people will think about, and will help you, because the problem that you're looking at is not going away, and it's not getting any smaller.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so much misinformation now, and being in the US, where now people in our government are even spreaders of huge misinformation and non-scientific conspiracy theories. It's not a side little movement we don't have to worry about. It is a movement that is very active. It is gaining a lot of steam, and so I'm very worried about the immediate future of research in the US in particular. I mean, there's the vaccine program just has been decimated, and it's just horrible to see all the good things we as scientists have built up are being broken down. So I'm not sure how to deal with that, because it's no longer a fringe movement. It's the mainstream. It's our government in the US. So I am very pessimistic about the immediate future of science, at least in the US. I'm very worried about that. And there's a lot of good scientists who are trying their best to send a good message and to spread the good science. But if we're dealing with a government that is full of people who are not fans of science and not believe in the scientific process, then it is really hard to come up with new ideas that would work.
Yeah, and it goes back to the discussions around why do bad academics or do what they do? Why are the politicians doing what they do? Is it incompetence? Is it that there's money in the background pushing other agendas, isn't it? And that's the problem we have. We don't know always why they're saying what they say, but to kick science and to treat science like they are particularly in the US, we all lose, and that is really, really sad. So hopefully we can put Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr. in the bin for a start.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And we'll confine them to the under review bin, and hopefully in the US we will hopefully in the next couple of years start to see something more positive happen. Fingers crossed. Hopefully people will start to realize, you know, Mr. Trump's popularity rating is very low in the US, but obviously again he doesn't like evidence, and he'll say otherwise, won't he? So
he will, yeah. And I think I'm just worried we need to go through, you know, hundreds of kids dying of measles and meningitis and all the you know, the things we have vaccines to protect them against. If we are, you know, thinking of an immediate future where kids are not vaccinated against these diseases, a lot of kids unfortunately might die before people realize that that might not have been a good decision. And yeah, if we don't listen to scientists, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, so I suppose ultimately what you can do, and that of your peers and people at Retraction Watch and others, is to continue to call out the bad science.
Yes, absolutely.
Continue to stop it from getting to source. The conspiracy theorists will always have a conspiracy theory. Right? They will always say that, well, that's been retracted because of X, Y, Z. You can't really.
It's censored.
It's censored. You can't legislate. You know that's going to happen anyway. So all you've got to do is continue doing the good fight you do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, I think the academic community, the good academic community, of which that is the majority, vast majority, will applaud you and others for doing that. And I, you know, applaud you myself for doing that. I want to thank you for giving up your time to record this. And
yeah, it was my pleasure. I hope we can make the world, the scientific world, a little bit better. And absolutely, we definitely toss some things in the bin. For sure.
Absolutely, and I think that's what we need to do. We're going to have to be a bit braver as a global community to do that, to try a few new ways of doing things, but also not be afraid to actually get rid of things, or to break a few things maybe along the way. So thank you, Elisabeth. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure, Andy.